She spent 46 hours knitting a gift by hand, carefully choosing the yarn, wrapping it in muslin, tying it with rosemary. At the party, her niece didn't even open it. Days later, she saw the cardigan still wrapped, then watched a video of it being burned for laughs. No apology, no explanation, just silence. But what followed wasn't revenge, was memory, thread by thread. A box, a message, a quiet unraveling of what love becomes when it's ignored. This isn't just a story about a sweater, it's about what we give, what gets erased, and how some knots are never meant to be undone. What would you do with the ashes? She began it in January, though the birthday wasn't until March. A new pattern, unfamiliar, challenging in ways she hadn't expected. Each evening, she sat by the window with her tea growing cold beside her, looping red yarn over the curve of the needle, undoing mistakes, trying again. The yarn was soft, warm, the color like deep cherry bark after rain. It reminded her of something old, something steady, something she thought might be loved. It wasn't the first thing she'd knitted. For her niece, there had been a cream blanket when she was born, stitched between work shifts and grief after a hard winter. A pair of striped socks at 7. A lopsided shawl at 10 that she still remembered seeing tossed over the arm of a couch, crumpled but used. This year, her niece would be 20. A milestone. Not quite an adult in the world's eyes, but no. Longer a child in hers. She wanted the gift to reflect that. Grown, but not cold. Thoughtful, but not loud. She chose a cardigan, cropped slightly, with soft ridges down the sleeves and a looped collar she hadn't tried before. The yarn had cost more than she usually allowed herself to spend, but she told herself it was worth it. Worth the hours. Worth the thimbled thumb and the fraying cuticles. Worth the feeling of satisfaction that came when she finally laid it flat on the table and saw that it had become something real. She wrapped it carefully, not in store-bought paper, but in a cloth she'd saved from a trip years ago, a faded piece of muslin printed with tiny blue ferns. She tied it with a piece of leftover yarn, knotted tight and tucked with a dried sprig of rosemary. Not fancy, but quiet, personal. She had written a note, too, in her best handwriting, just a line. I hope this keeps you warm when no one else is thinking of the weather. The party was at a rented cabin in the hills. Not rustic, not homey. Polished floors and curated decor designed for photographs. The kind of place where furniture was rearranged for the sake of group shots and no one took off their shoes. Arrived on time, gift in hand, in her neat coat and good boots. No one greeted her at the door. She let herself in. The living room was already full. People she recognized only from photos. Friends from college, the new boyfriend, few cousins, who looked older than she remembered. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker, and someone was pouring drinks into mismatched glasses. She set the gift down on the table with the other's bags stuffed with tissue. Boxes with bold ribbon. One envelope heavy enough to be money. No one noticed. She spent the next hour standing mostly near the fireplace, making quiet conversation when approached, laughing politely at stories she didn't quite follow. The birthday girl swept through the room like light, hugging people, posing for photos, never quite still. She had grown into someone elegant, loud in her joy, quick with compliments, surrounded by motion. When the time came for gifts, the music lowered. Someone brought over the pile. She watched as each item was unwrapped. Laughter, thank yous, quick glances into bags followed by thrown-away tissue and calls for the next gift. And then there it was, the cloth wrapping. She saw her niece hesitate. For half a second, fingers brushing the rosemary. "What's this?" she asked, lightheartedly, already loosening the knot. She watched her pull it out. Hold it up, smiles, mull, polite. No words about the detail, the hours, the softness. It's just a quick, "Oh, wow, you made this, right?" Followed by a laugh from someone else in the room. She nodded from across the table. Yes, I wasn't sure on the size. But her niece had already turned to the next gift. The sweater was folded, laid gently aside, half covered by tissue from another box. That was it. No thank you. No trying it on. No glance in her direction again. She stood there for a moment too long, then picked up her glass, took a sip of something warm, moved toward the hallway to get her coat. She didn't cry, she didn't say goodbye, she just stepped out into the cold. The sound of laughter following her like something she hadn't. Earn the cardigan had taken 46 hours. The birthday had taken 5 minutes to forget. She told herself it didn't matter, that maybe the room had been too loud, that maybe her niece had been overwhelmed, that the sweater would be tried on later, in private, when things had quieted and people had gone. She told herself a lot of things on the drive home. The road curved through patches of bare trees and half-melted snow. And she kept both hands on the wheel, blinking too often as if something in her eye needed clearing. She didn't play music, didn't listen to the radio. Just the low hum of the engine and the sound of the wind brushing the side of the car. She watched the sky change as she drove. The pale pinks from the cabin faded into the dull blue of early evening. It was the kind of drive she used to enjoy, just her and the stillness, but that night it was too quiet. Like something inside her had gone mute. At home, she didn't take off her coat right away. Just stood inside the doorway, keys still in her hand, and stared at the basket of yarn near the couch. It was still full. She had organized it earlier that week, lining up the skeins by color, stacking the unused patterns beneath. The red one, the same kind she'd used for the cardigan, still sat near the top. A leftover ball, neatly wound, untouched. She moved slowly, not because she was tired, but because the evening had taken something from her. Not all at once, just small pieces. The kind of taking that you don't feel until after everyone else has gone home and the house is still. She boiled. Water for tea. Peppermint. Familiar. Calming. She sat at the kitchen table and waited for it. Too steep, staring at the steam rising from the cup like it might carry answers she didn't know how to ask for. Her hands rested flat on the table, fingers slightly curled. She didn't pick up her phone. She didn't check messages. She knew there would be none. When she thought back to the moment, the gift being opened, what stayed with her wasn't the lack of thanks or the polite tone. It was the smile. That quick, automatic kind. It's the kind people wear when they're ready to move on. It's the kind that closes more doors than it opens. She had spent weeks imagining how it might go. How her niece might lift the sweater to her chest, eyes wide, voice soft with appreciation. "You made this," she'd say. "It's beautiful." Maybe she'd put it on right there, despite the room being warm, and smile in a way that said, "I see the hours you gave me," instead. There had been that smile, brief, unrooted, like it belonged to someone else. She had always taken pride in being the one who gave gifts that mattered. Not expensive, not flashy, but specific. Chosen. Made. Her knitting was never perfect, but it was consistent. It held warmth, intention, and she had believed for years that that kind of care still meant something, that it still had weight, but now she wasn't sure. She sat for a long time after the tea had gone cold, the cup untouched, her hands unmoved. She stared at the edge of the table, tracing the wood grain with her eyes like a map that led nowhere. And slowly, carefully, something began to shift inside her. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something softer. The first loose thread of belief beginning to come undone. The idea that effort always meant something. The idea that being thoughtful was still seen. She didn't cry. She didn't sigh. She didn't even frown. But the smile she had worn all evening, the one she had practiced in the mirror before. Leaving had finally begun to unravel, and there was no one in the room to notice. It was 3 days later when she saw it again. Not in her niece's hands. Not in a thank you message or a photo captioned with gratitude. But in the background of someone else's picture and Instagram story taken during the birthday party. Reposted and reshared. The image was framed around a cluster of girls posing near the fireplace, drinks in hand, their heads tilted inward in a practiced angle of closeness. They were laughing. Frozen mid-laugh, really? The kind of laugh people expect you to have on your birthday. The kind that looks effortless, even if it isn't. But it wasn't their expressions that caught her. Tension. It was the gift, folded neatly, resting on the mantel behind them, still wrapped. The soft muslin cloth was unmistakable, the knot tied, just as she had done it. The rosemary sprig slightly askew, brittle leaves curling against the side of the package. Unopened. 3 days after the party. Still unopened. She paused the video, thumb pressed against the screen, her eyes locked on the shape she knew by heart. The weight of it, the way the fabric fell just slightly at one corner. That corner held the note. She remembered pressing it into place with care. I hope this keeps you warm when no one else is thinking of the weather. She'd written it in pen, black, clean, simple, and it hadn't even been read. She closed the app, set the phone face down on the table beside her. Her cup of tea had gone cold again, though she hadn't meant to let it. The window beside her was gray with rain, thin, steady lines trailing down the pane. A day meant for staying in, 4 blankets, or quiet work. The kind of day she used to dream of spending with her niece, watching old movies. Folding laundry, knitting side by side. She stood up slowly and walked to the yarn basket. Her hand hovered above the leftover skein of red before she pulled it away. Not yet. Not again. Not now. Instead, she reached into the drawer where she kept finished projects, one she hadn't gifted yet. Scarves, mittens, a baby blanket she'd started just because the pattern was soft. She ran her fingers over the folded edges. Nothing had been wrapped. Nothing labeled. Nothing yet chosen. They felt heavier than they used to. She had never needed to be celebrated, never asked for praise. But she had always believed that a gift, when made by hand, held something more than fabric and thread. It held time. And time, when given freely, was supposed to be noticed. That was all she'd wanted, to be noticed. Not as someone who needed attention, but as someone who still had something worth offering. She sat again, hands folded in her lap. The memory of the unopened gift lodged itself somewhere deeper now. Not sharp like betrayal, but dull like forgetting. It was one thing to be disliked. It was another to be erased. She imagined the gift still sitting there, forgotten in plain sight. Maybe someone would move it soon. Maybe it would be tossed aside during cleaning. Maybe her niece would see it, wrinkle her nose, and ask, "Whose is this?" And no one would answer, because no one remembered, not even the one it was made for. The gift that took 46 hours now sat on a mantel like a misdelivered package, and she, Smaker, sat alone in her kitchen. The rain pressing against the glass, and tried to forget the shape of that muslin knot. But she couldn't, because some knots don't untie. They just sit, waiting. The quiet returned. But it was a different kind now. Not peace, not rest. Just a silence that settled in the corners of the room like something unwelcome, something thick. She moved through her routines, the morning tea, the light cleaning, the check-ins with neighbors, but everything felt slower, muted, as though someone had turned down the volume on the world and left her inside it, listening for something. That wouldn't come. She hadn't touched her needles in days. The yarn remained in its basket, the red ball on top soft and untouched, like a question she was too tired to answer. She passed it each morning. Once she reached for it, then stopped. Her fingers hovered, brushed the surface of the skein, and pulled away. Not yet. Not again. Not for now. It wasn't that she didn't want to make something. It was that she didn't want to offer it. Not again. Not so soon, but on the 5th night, when the light outside had gone and the kitchen clock ticked too loudly, and the warmth from her mug faded faster than usual, she found herself sitting at the armchair again, not with intention, just out of habit. The basket beside her, the needles tucked where they always were. She reached down slowly, lifting one of the smoother wooden pairs, and without fully deciding to begin, cast on a row. It was muscle memory. The slip knot, the tension, the steady pull. She didn't need to count. She didn't need to check the pattern. Her hands knew. Her hands had always known. The yarn didn't ask anything of her. That's what she liked most. It didn't require permission or performance. It didn't expect smiles or poses or replies. It simply waited. And when she came back to it, it forgave her for leaving. Stitch by stitch, the piece began to take shape. Something small, a square. Nothing planned, just rhythm, just motion. Let the thread glide between her fingers, the red looping over and over, soft and precise. There was no music playing, no television, no conversation. It's just the click of the needles and the occasional sigh from the radiator. It's a quiet kind of ceremony, the kind the world doesn't see. The kind that steadies you without asking anything in return, she thought, while she worked. Not about the party, not about the photo, but about all the things she'd made before. The blanket for her sister's baby, who never arrived. The mittens for her friend who moved and never wrote again. The cardigan she made for her own mother. Worn once before being folded and kept in a drawer too nice to wear. So many hours, so many stitches, so many things made with love, then tucked away, lost or misunderstood. But she hadn't stopped. Even now, she hadn't. Because the making wasn't for them. Not entirely. It was for the stillness. The remembering, knowing that her hands could still turn thread into warmth. Not all gifts were meant to be received. Some were meant to prove, quietly, that she was still capable of giving. She set the needles down after an hour, the square, resting soft in her palm. It wasn't finished. It didn't need to be. But it existed now. It was real, tangible, unthrown, unburned, unforgott, and in the soft lamplight. As she smoothed the edges and folded it once, then again she allowed herself one thought, not bitter. Not angry, just clear. The needle always knows who sees. And who never did. The message came late on a Thursday. She was already in bed, the room dim except for the soft glow of her reading lamp. Her book was closed on her chest, half-read. Sleep hadn't come. Not really. Only restlessness. That's when the phone vibrated on the nightstand. One sharp buzz, then silence. She reached for it instinctively. No name she recognized, just a username. A private message from one of the girls who had been at the party. Someone she barely knew. She hesitated for opening it, her thumb hovering over the screen, unsure of what she was about to invite in. The message was short. "Hey, I didn't know if I should send this. I thought maybe you should see it. I'm sorry if it hurts." There was a link, a video. She tapped it. It was a clip less than 15 seconds. Taken at night, outside, the kind of video you capture without thinking. Laughter in the background, music too. A bonfire glowing bright and orange against the dark. Then the voice. Her niece's. I mean, honestly, what am I going to do with this? More laughter. A blur of red fabric held in both hands. Familiar. "Oh my God, you're not actually someone else," said off camera. Tone half laugh, half shock. But she was the cardigan. Her cardigan. Crumpled, lifted slightly like a flag, then tossed into the flames. The flames caught it quickly. The red yarn curled, darkened, vanished into ashdot. More laughter. Someone clapped. The clip ended. She stared at the screen long after it went black. Her reflection hovered there, dim, distorted, floating just behind the glass. The room felt smaller, the air sharper, not cold, just thin. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't even sit up. She just watched herself in the dark reflection, phone still in hand, and tried to understand. Not the action. That part was clear. The cardigan was gone, burned, laughed. Over? No. She was trying to understand the choice. The choice to record it. The choice to share it. The choice to turn something she made into a moment of entertainment. She turned the phone face down, slowly reached for her book and set it on the table. She turned off the light. The room fell into darkness. The image of the flames remained behind her eyes. It wasn't just the loss of the gift. It was the ease, the casual nature of it. As if it hadn't cost anything to make. As if it hadn't meant anything to receive. They hadn't seen the late nights, the pinpricks in her fingers, the tiny prayer woven into every stitch. Let this be enough. They had only seen something old-fashioned, unwanted, soft, something easy to throw away. She laid back in bed, eyes wide open, the ceiling barely visible. In the dark, that sweater hadn't been just fabric. It had been history, memory, love made visible. And now it was smoke. In the morning, she made tea without thinking, moved through her motions. But her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the kettle. Her thumb pressed hard into the counter to stop the shake. It wasn't sadness. Not entirely, it was something deeper. That sweater had taken 46 hours to make. It had taken 12 seconds to destroy. And someone had filmed it. She didn't reply to the message. She didn't ask why it had been sent. She already knew. There are people who laugh at fire. And then there are those who remember the warmth they meant to give. And suddenly was no longer unsure of what to do next. The video didn't stay on her phone. It's not long. She watched it once more the next day, just to make sure it was real. To confirm the red she saw curling in the flames was indeed the cardigan she had made with her own hands. The sprig of rosemary still tucked in the wrapping. The way it had landed a quiet shape against the orange, then folded, then vanished. She saved it to a hidden folder, not because she wanted to keep it, but because some things should not be allowed to disappear without record. Then she deleted the message. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The sender had gone silent. Anyway, no follow-up, no explanation. Just the single message left like a dropped match on the edge of a dry field. It's enough to burn, but never enough to stay and see what was lost. She didn't open her email for 3 days. When she finally did, there were updates from knitting newsletters, a shipping confirmation for a new book, 2 reminders to refill her prescription, and a forwarded chain from an old friend with subject lines full of exclamation points. Nothing from her niece, nothing from her sister, nothing from anyone in that circle. No apology, no explanation, not even the kind of message that says, "I heard what happened," without ever saying what. She scrolled slowly, letting her finger hover over each unread subject. Then she closed it. Her inbox had never felt so large, so quiet. She moved to her messages, scanned the text threads. The last message from her niece was from 2 weeks before the party. A short, "Can you bring napkins? The pretty ones from your pantry." She had brought 3 packs, all folded, in tissue. They'd never been used. The message was still marked red. She hadn't deleted it. She couldn't bring herself to, but she didn't write anything new. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask how. Because when someone burns something in front of other people, laughs while it catches flame, there isn't really a conversation left. Not one that starts with just wondering if I did something wrong. Instead, Sue sat on the edge of her bed that evening, phone resting on her knee, staring at the blank screen. A silence so complete, it almost felt curated. As if everyone had decided that the best way to handle what had happened was to pretend it hadn't. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't invisible either. She existed. She had been there. She had made something. And that something had been set on fire for the sake of a joke. And now silence. She reached for her knitting basket and ran her fingers over the folded patterns tucked beneath the yarn. One, in particular, still held a note from last winter. Her niece had circled the design and written in quick pencil strokes, "This is cute. I'd wear this." It was dated February, 11 months ago. She didn't remember writing that, but her aunt had kept it, as she always did, because care too. Her had always meant keeping track of small things others forgot. Now, though, she was starting to see something clearly, not as a wound, but as a shape. Some people aren't careless. They're careful in a different way. Careful with their distance. Careful with their silence. Careful with how they never quite say thank you, but never quite close the door. Either they keep you close enough to use, but never close enough to hold. And when you finally stop offering, when the inbox stays quiet, and the phone doesn't buzz, they don't notice the absence because they never felt the presence to begin with. That night, she placed her phone on the charger, screen down, and turned off the lamp. The inbox stayed empty and her hands quiet. Still deliberate found the needles again. She didn't plan it. Not at first. There was no outline, no list. No announcement made to the silence around her. Just one morning cold still. The sky gray with hesitation, she opened the drawer beside her bed and found her hands moving without instruction. She reached past the old reading glasses and folded letters and pulled out a small envelope. Inside, it was a photograph not framed, just printed, glossy, from a year ago. Her niece sitting at the kitchen table, sleeves pushed up, laughing over a bowl of batter. There was flour on her cheek, the mixing spoon still in her hand, cake they had made together, half for fun, half for practice. She had kept the photo tucked away because it had felt like proof of something: warmth, connection, shared time. She set it on the table, not to frame, not to look at. To pack. That's how it started. Not as a response, as a reminder. She found a shoebox in the closet, plain brown, unlabeled. She dusted the lid with her sleeve and set it down on the table. The photograph went inside first. She didn't intend to send it, not yet, maybe not ever. But her hands kept moving. Next came the recipe card, the one written in her niece's crooked 12-year-old handwriting. Auntie's banana bread, no walnuts. Thin purple ink still faintly smudged. Where she had leaned on it too hard while writing, the corners were worn. Back had a doodle of a cat with a crown. She placed it in the box without smoothing it, then a ribbon, pale green. Once tied around a birthday cake box when her niece turned 16 and didn't want a party. Just a movie night. She had saved it without meaning to. Folded it over a doorknob and forgotten it until she found it months later and thought, some things don't belong in the trash. Unto the box it went. She didn't stop to consider what she was doing. Not really. She just walked through the house quiet, barefoot, deliberate, tanned. Let her fingers find the things no one else had thought to miss. A train ticket stub from a day trip they took 4 years ago. A dried flower she'd pressed between pages of a book her niece had borrowed once and never finished. A button that had come loose from the cardigan during blocking, still saved in a jar by the sink. Each item was small, ordinary, but they carried a weight that couldn't be measured by the box. She didn't pack them with bitterness. There was no heat in her motion, just precision. The kind of care that doesn't announce itself. The kind of care that remains, even when the person it's for forgets what it meant. When the box was half full, she paused, sat at the table. Her hands rest flat on the wood. There was no satisfaction in the gathering, no power reclaimed, no message written on the lid. But there was something steadier, a quiet understanding that not everything needs to be understood by the person it's for. Some things just need to be kept, tended, named, because the people who forget us still shape us, and the pieces we save are sometimes all that's left when the fire clears. She placed the lid gently on top, not sealing it. Not yet, just holding it closed. For now, she didn't open the yarn drawer, often not because she had forgotten it, but because everything inside had already been chosen. Skeins. Waiting for future gifts. Projects she had once planned in the margins of grocery lists and utility bills. There was an order to it. Reds in Thefront. Blues to the side. Patterns tucked into the back like secret recipes. Was the one drawer in the house untouched by haste. Everything inside had been folded, wound, stored with intention. But that morning, with the box still half filled and the silence still unbroken, she slid the drawer open and let herself look. The red was still there, not the skein she had used. That was gone now, burned, but its twin, wound tight, clean, The same dye lot, the same weight, the same soft sheen that had made her choose it in the first place. It had been meant for a second project. Matching gloves, maybe, or a hat. Something to follow the cardigan. Something to complete it. She reached for it carefully. Her fingers brushed the surface, familiar light. And something inside her paused. It wasn't just yarn. Not anymore. It was what she had left of the original intent. The part that hadn't been scorched or laughed at or discarded. It was, in its way, untouched memory. She held it in both hands, unsure at first if she would use it, if she could. But her hands knew what it was, what it had meant. It's the hours it had been meant to hold. It's the warmth she had imagined wrapping around someone who now didn't want to feel it. Still, she didn't put it back. She set it gently beside the box on the table and sat with it. She remembered how excited she had been when she bought it. The woman at the yarn shop had complimented the color. Not too bright, not too dull. That's hard to find in red. She'd agreed. It reminded her of warmth, of steadiness, of winter evenings that don't ask for company but are somehow less lonely when something soft wraps around your shoulders. She'd wound it by hand. One loop at a time, watching it become something manageable, controlled, ready, and now here. It was a perfect twin to what had been lost. But this one hadn't been thrown away. This one still waited. She reached into the drawer again and pulled out a piece of muslin. Not the same one, a different print. Tiny stars this time, not ferns. She folded it once, placed the yarn inside, and tied it with twine. No rosemary. No note, she didn't add it to the box. Not yet. She placed it beside it. A second offering. Quiet, undelivered, not everything needs to be sent. Some things are just reminders that what was given wasn't everything, that there's always something left behind whole, untouched, still waiting, even after the fire, even after the silence. She didn't close the yarn drawer, left it open slightly. The corner of a blue skein peeking through. She liked the imperfection of that something so carefully kept could remain open, still reachable, still hers. She untied the muslin slowly, not to take it apart but to do it again, differently. The knot had been rushed, too tight at the corners, not quite aligned. That mattered now. Not because she needed the gift to be perfect, because it had always been in the details. That was how she loved. Quietly, precisely. In thread and corners and seams that didn't fray. She pressed the cloth flat against the table, smoothing it with both hands, as if erasing the first attempt. Then she placed the red skein back in the center, this time folding the fabric over it in 3 even sections, like wrapping a letter. She reached for the twine, looped it slowly, crossed it once, then again. A soft knot, intentional, light. Enough to be untied without scissors. It was never about revenge. That thought had followed her from room to room these past few days. As the silence stretched longer and the box filled steadily beside her, what she was doing wasn't spite. Wazer cord keeping. A kind of memory making no one asked for, but someone, someday, might need. She opened the box again. The photograph still lay where she had left it. Resting against the ribbon, the card, the train stub. A life told in scraps, not sentimental. Just. Real, just things that had once mattered enough to keep. She added something new, the label, from the original cardigan. She had cut it out months ago and replaced it with her own hand-stitched version. It's just a small piece of white cotton with her initials in red thread sewn inside the collar. But she had saved the tag that came with the yarn, the official one. 100% merino wool, hand-dyed, hand-wash only. Warmth guaranteed. She'd tucked it in the drawer and forgotten it. Now she placed it on top of the photo, not as proof, but as context. Because some people only see the finished gift. They never look at the tag, never see what it took to choose. It's the fiber that wouldn't itch. The color that wouldn't fade. The pattern that required counting rows over and over until the stitch held its shape. She thought of all the seams she'd sewn over the years. The inside ones invisible when worn. The ones that didn't show in photos. The ones no one complimented but always noticed. When they came undone, she had mended so many. Without being asked, without being thanked. Because that's what she'd been taught. To make things strong where they're likely to split. And that's what this box was becoming. Not a punishment, not a threat. A seam. A reminder of what had been held together. She folded the muslin again and placed the red yarn gently beside the box. She still wasn't sure if it would go in. All right, if it was meant to stay, but it belonged in the room now. In this chapter, she stepped back, rubbed her eyes, and looked at everything she had gathered. It wasn't beautiful, but it was true, and that, she had learned, is the kind of gift most people never open. Even when it's right in their hands. She found the card in the drawer where she kept things too delicate to throw away. Wedding invitations from people who had long since stopped calling, handwritten notes in fading ink. A thank you card from her niece, dated years ago. With the words, "Thank you for always remembering the little things." She ran her thumb over that line once, then tucked it back. The new card she chose was plain, cream-colored, thick, unlined. It had no decoration, no gold foil, no embossed corners. It was a card meant to hold whatever someone was brave enough to write down. She stared at the blank space for a while, pen resting in her fingers, unsure what should be if anything at all. No, dear. No sign-off, just a single sentence. For when you forget where you come from. She didn't add her name. She didn't need to. If it was read, it would be understood. And if it wasn't, a name wouldn't make the meaning any clearer. She placed the card at the very top of the box over the train ticket beneath the ribbon. Not hidden, not emphasized, just there. A quiet message folded into the seams of memory and paper. Not angry. Not shaming. Just true. The box now felt heavier, not in weight. In presence, she ran her hand once over the lid. Not closing it yet, just pressing lightly, though the things inside might shift if left alone for too long. Each item had been chosen without fanfare, without explanation, but they all spoke the same language. A language her niece might not remember how to read anymore. Still, she had packed it. Because love doesn't always stay in the shape we expect. Sometimes it becomes a collection of small things. A photograph, a recipe card, a button, a thread. Things you only realize were part of the story after you've tossed them out. She stood by the table for a long time. The evening light had shifted. Gold had given way to gray. She didn't turn on the lamp. She let the dimness settle. There was no anger in the room. Just something resolved. Not finished, but done. She reached for the packing tape. Not the loud industrial kind, but the one she kept in the drawer with the scissors and twine used mostly for wrapping parcels in the winter. She sealed the box with a single line across the middle. Clean, firm. A closure that didn't feel like an ending. It's just a pause. There was no return address, no name on the outside, only the small card inside. With those 8 words, she placed the box by the door beside her shoes, as though it might walk itself to its destination, given enough time. And then she sat, hands resting in her lap, back straight, and for the first time since the party, since the fire, since the silence she exhaled without holding anything back. It wasn't a gift, not anymore. It was a record, and it was ready to be sent. She chose the hour carefully. Not too early, she didn't want it mistaken for a delivery from a courier, but not so late that the hallway would be full of neighbors returning home, arms filled with shopping bags and distracted glances. She didn't want to explain. No, she didn't want to be asked what's in the box, so she waited until mid-afternoon, the time of day when most people were elsewhere. When the world moved quietly, as if exhaling between tasks, the box fit neatly in her arms. It wasn't heavy. but it pressed against her in a way that made her walk slower, more deliberately, as if each step was not just forward, but inward toward something that had taken shape in silence. The cardboard had a soft crease at the corner now, where her thumb had held it too tightly the night before. She didn't try to smooth it. Felt right that it wasn't perfect. Her niece lived in a converted townhouse just off the main road. It's a modern building with a clean entryway and a security camera angled downward at the mailboxes. She had been there before, for holidays, for rushed visits, for dinners where everyone arrived late and left early. She remembered how the lobby always smelled faintly of eucalyptus and elevator oil. A strange mix of calm and machinery. The doors opened without resistance. She stepped inside and was met with silence, the kind that lives in carpeted spaces and neutral paint. No music, no footsteps. Just the soft hum of lighting that never truly shuts off. She didn't take the elevator. Her niece was only on the second floor. She took the stairs, one hand steadying the box, the other tracing the metal railing. At the top, she paused. Not to reconsider, just to breathe. The door was plain, no wreath, no welcome mat. Just the small brass number she knew by heart. Though she had never written it down, she knelt gently. Placed the box against the door with care, not centered, but slightly to the right. The way she always placed things, off-center, unassuming. Then she stood, she didn't knock, she didn't ring. That wasn't the point. This wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't even a delivery. It was an offering. Quiet, complete. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single piece of twine, already knotted at one end. She looped it loosely around the box, not to secure it, but to mark it. A final thread. A quiet reminder that this had been touched, assembled, sent with thought. Then she turned. Her footsteps echoed softly against the stairwell wall as she descended. At the bottom, she paused once more, hand on the door, waiting, not listening. For movement upstairs, not hoping for the click of the latch. Stillness. Just to mark the moment, and then she walked out into the daylight. It was colder than she remembered. The street was quiet. A child's scooter leaned against a tree. A car passed slowly, windows up, radio faintly audible. She kept her hands in her coat pockets as she made her way back to the bus stop. She didn't turn around. She didn't look back at the building, because it wasn't hers to look at anymore. The box was there. The message had been sent. Not loudly, not with anger, just with care. And care, she knew now, didn't always need to be received to have mattered. It only needed to be given, completely, and left. 2 days passed. No sound, no message, no delivery alert. Not that she expected one. Hadn't written her name, she hadn't included a return address. But still some small part of her had wondered, had waited. The way people wait for a letter they claim they don't need. The phone stayed face down on the table, its screen cold. It's time she passed it. She didn't touch it, didn't tap. To check on the third day, notification arrived. Not a message, a photo. It came through an old group thread, long, muted, mostly dormant. Place where family members had once shared recipes, birthday updates, screenshots of video calls gone. Blurry. The kind of thread that no one deletes, but everyone forgets. And there it was, a single image. The box unwrapped, open, spread out on a pale kitchen table. No caption, no emojis, no tags, just the photo. As if that alone said everything. The red yarn sat in the center, still folded in the muslin, the twine placed neatly to one side. The photograph, now slightly curled, was visible in the corner. The ribbon, the recipe card, the train stub, all arranged deliberately, it seemed, but with no explanation. There were no responses in the thread, no hearts, no thumbs up, no questions, just the photo. She stared at it for a long time, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. It had been seen, not discarded, not mocked, but also not answered. It sat in the middle of that thread like something radioactive, a thing to be observed but not touched. as if any response would be too much. It's too risky. To revealing, she looked closer. The yarn had not been unraveled. Her card was missing from the image. For a moment, she wondered if it had been removed before the photo was taken, or simply left out intentionally, or perhaps never. Even read dot, she would never know. She didn't reply to the thread. She didn't forward it. She didn't screen capture or save it. She simply let it remain, floating there. Like so many things in that family, acknowledged, but never spoken aloud. The rest of the day passed quietly. The laundry was folded. The windows opened for a few hours to let in fresh air. A book was started, then closed halfway through. And each time she returned to her phone, the image was still there, unchanged, untouched. She found herself wondering how it had been opened. Was it her niece who lifted the lid? Or someone else? Did anyone pause while unwrapping the yarn? Did the scent of rosemary from old fibers still cling to the cloth? These were not the kind of questions she could ask. Not anymore. And so she did what she always did. She worked with her. Hands this time, she didn't reach for red. She pulled soft gray from the drawer neutral. Calm, unnamed. She didn't know what she was making, but the stitches came. One by one, not with anger, not with grief, just presence. Because sometimes the only way to answer silence is to create something in its place. Something that doesn't ask to be kept. Doesn't need to be loved. Something that simply exists. Like a thread without a knot. Like care without condition, like love without applause. It was her sister's idea. A quiet dinner. Just the three of them to catch up, she'd said. Nothing formal. The message had come without punctuation, the way her sister often wrote, casual, breezy, like nothing had ever happened. No mention of the party, no mention of the fire, no mention of the box. She accepted the invitation, not out of curiosity, not out of forgiveness, but because she wanted to see what silence looked like in person. The restaurant was a small bistro. Downtown, mid-range, exposed brick, dim lighting, the soft clink of silverware over low jazz. They had eaten there once before, years ago. Back when the three of them still exchanged Christmas gifts. Back when her niece still asked her opinion. Before making a big decision, she arrived exactly on time. They were already seated. Her niece looked up first, smiled too quickly. Her sister stood, half-hugged her, then gestured toward the empty seat, as if it had always been hers to fill. No one mentioned the cardigan. No one mentioned the box. Menus were opened. Water was poured. The waiter came and left. Conversation hovered over neutral ground. Her niece had started. It's a new job. Her sister had switched to oat milk. They had seen that new series everyone was watching. Wasn't it funny? Wasn't the ending strange? She nodded. Where appropriate. She asked no questions. The food arrived. Warm, carefully plated, forgotten within minutes. It was not until the second glass of wine that her sister asked, almost too softly, still knitting. She looked up, met her niece's. Eyes briefly, then nodded once. Yes. That was all, no elaboration. No offering to make something. No mention of what had already been. Made and lost. Her niece looked down at her plate. Her sister changed the subject. Later, over dessert, her niece finally spoke without script. I got your box, she said. Not loud, not quiet. Her spoon tapped. Once against her cup. I figured you did, she said. A pause. It was a lot. I know. Another pause. I didn't expect that. She took a sip of her coffee. No one ever does. Silence settled between them again. Not sharp, just present. Her sister shifted in her seat, smiled too brightly. The mousse is good, right? No one answered that. The check came without being requested. Her sister reached for it, insisted. Her niece stood first, said thank you, gave a quick hug. Her arms were softer than she remembered. Hesitant, I'll walk you to the door, her niece offered. They stepped outside together. The night was cold. The sidewalk nearly empty. Neither of them spoke right away. Finally, her niece said, "I didn't burn it on purpose. Not like that." "I didn't mean I know what you meant," she interrupted gently. Her niece stopped, "And I know what you didn't." They stood for another moment, two outlines in the city light. Then she placed her hand on her niece's shoulder. "Light, brief, take care," she said, and then she walked away, not because she was angry, but because there was nothing left. To explain, the cardigan was gone. The box had been opened, and the rest would unfold in silence. She didn't delete the photo. It's the one from the thread. It had sunk to the bottom of her gallery now, beneath grocery lists, receipts. It's blurry shots of clouds she had meant to delete but never did. But she knew where it was, and sometimes she looked at it, not with longing, not with regret, just with a quiet sort of remembering. There had been no messages since the dinner. No follow-up, no apology, no thank you. But that, too, was familiar. Some people mistake absence for resolution, though silence means peace instead of pause. She kept drafting messages in her head, not texts, not emails, just thoughts with shape, lines that never made it to a keyboard. "Do you know how long it took me to choose that yarn? You looked me in the eye after you threw it into the fire. You used to call me when your world didn't make sense. But you never sent any of them?" She didn't even write them down. Some were too sharp. Some were too soft. Some no longer matched the person she was becoming on the other side of the silence. What she did write, she kept in a notebook by her bed. Not letters, observations. Things like, "Warmth isn't Oditsgiven," or "It's not." Some. "Stitches hold even when the person wearing them lets go." "I don't need to be remembered to keep remembering." She hadn't written before. Not like this. But the words arrived now, in the quiet hours, when the light outside faded into that color between blue and gray. The words didn't demand anything. They didn't ask to be read. They just asked to be true. She wondered sometimes if her niece ever looked at the box again, if she had unpacked it, if she had touched the yarn, turned over the card, held the photograph with both hands, or if it had all been folded away, and placed in a closet. Neat, tidy, out of sight. She would never ask because what she had sent was not a puzzle with a right. Answered, threaded, and memory didn't owe her a response. One afternoon, as she watered the violets by the kitchen window, she found herself thinking again of the rosemary she'd used for the cardigan. Not the dried leaves she'd wrapped into the paper, the plant itself. Once thriving on the balcony, long since gone brittle in the cold. She didn't replace it. Instead, she placed a small pot of thyme in its spot. New scent, new shape, same care. She didn't expect her niece to come by. She didn't expect another dinner. But if either happened, she'd still have something warm to offer. It might not be a gift. It might not be anything wrapped or labeled. It might just be a hand resting gently on a teacup, a nod, a question about the weather. But that would be enough, because some messages don't need to be sent. They just need to be held. The pattern had been sitting in her drawer for months, folded neatly between pages of a magazine she no longer subscribed to. She hadn't meant to find it. That day had simply slipped loose as she was searching for something else. Reminder. A design she had once torn out carefully, thinking it would make the perfect birthday present. But this time, she didn't fold it back. She smoothed it against the table, traced the lines with her finger. It was a wrap. Soft, wide, meant to fall over the shoulders like a shield. It wasn't the sort of thing people ask for. It was the sort of thing you made for someone you wanted to feel safe, protected, held without being touched. She gathered the yarn. The next morning, not red. A deep, muted green, the color of moss under trees. The color of something that grows without needing to be seen. She worked in the afternoons, when the house was still, and in the evenings when the light dimmed and her hands could move without thinking. Row after row, a rhythm she hadn't felt in weeks. Not since the fire. Not since the cardigan. It was different. Sky, she didn't measure it against anyone else's shoulders. She didn't imagine it being worn by someone who might not appreciate it. She just let it form. For herself. There was no deadline, no occasion, only the quiet joy of shaping something from nothing. She made small adjustments to the pattern as she, when changed the border, widened the edge, let it suit her. Let it become hers. She didn't look for validation, didn't show it to anyone. It stayed folded beside her seat, untouched by other hands. And when it was done, she didn't wrap it. She draped it across her own shoulders, pulled it close, felt the weight. It wasn't heavy. But it stayed. She moved through the house wearing it not to show it off, but to remind herself what care could feel like when it wasn't tangled in obligation, when no one else had to accept. If for it to matter, she brewed tea and let it steep longer than usual. She opened a book and let herself read the same paragraph twice. She sat by the window as rain began to gather on the glass and didn't get up right away to do something else. It was not indulgence. It was repair. Each stitch in the wrap held something she didn't need to explain anymore. Not to her niece, not to her sister, not to anyone. And as the wind pressed gently against the window pane, and the green yarn warmed slowly against her neck, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit until now. She had been making gifts for people all her life, and for the first time, she had made one for herself, without apology, without erasure. And it fit. She stitched her name into the lining. Not the whole name, just her initials. Small. In the same moss green thread, barely visible unless you knew where to look. She hadn't planned to. It had been years since she'd added her initials to anything she made. Most things she gave away, think the ones she kept didn't need a name to belong to her. But this one felt different. Not because she needed anyone to know it was hers, but because she needed to claim it. The act was quiet. No ceremony. It's just a few careful pulls of the needle, the kind that don't ask for praise. She tied the final knot, tucked the thread, and folded the wrap over the back of her chair. It would stay there, within reach, not hidden in a drawer, not saved for a special occasion. It had already served its purpose. That day she noticed something she hadn't in a long time. Her hands didn't ache, not like they used to. Maybe it was the weather, maybe the slower pace, or maybe after everything they had stopped clenching around what they couldn't fix. The phone rang that evening. Not a message, not a photo. It's a real call. She let it ring twice before answering. It was her niece. Her voice was light, uncertain. "I found the recipe," she said, as though that were the beginning of a conversation. "The one on the card." There was a pause. "I tried to make it," she added. Another pause. "It didn't turn out." She almost smiled. "It never does the first time," she said. Her niece laughed softly just once. "I didn't know that." She replied, "I didn't expect you to." They didn't say much after that. Just a few words about the weather, work, a comment about how the neighborhood. Kat had been sleeping under her car again. Before hanging up, her niece said, "I kept the yarn." That was all. She didn't ask for a new cardigan. She didn't apologize. But she didn't hang up without saying it, and that mattered more than she expected. After the call, she walked to the window. The sky had turned the color of slate, and the street lights blinked on without sound. She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, not out of cold, but out of comfort, and stood for a while. Letting the stillness settle, her name was stitched into the fabric. Now, not because she needed to be seen, but because she no longer needed to be erased. That was the difference. And it was enough. It came in a padded envelope, the kind that makes no sound when dropped onto the floor. No name on the front, just her address written in careful, even script. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but something about the restraint felt familiar, like someone trying very hard not to say too much. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small tin dot, old, slightly dented, the kind people used to keep mints in. It rattled faintly when she shook it, but she already knew what was inside before lifting. The lid dot buttons, not her whole collection, of course, but enough. Enough to recognize them. Enough to understand. There was the mother of her furl circle she had once sewn onto a baby cardigan. The deep navy one with the scuff near the rim that had never matched anything, but she kept anyway. The small red square that looked like a cherry drop, too bright, too loud, but always there, and folded beneath them was a note. Just a torn scrap of paper. A grocery list on the back. And for words, I think I remember. No name, no punctuation. Just that she sat at the table, the tin in front of her, and let her fingers move slowly over the buttons. They were cool at first. Then warmer. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a declaration. It was something quieter. A breadcrumb. A hand extended. Not fully open. Not closed either. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed. And then she reached into the drawer. Beside her second from the top. The one that stuck slightly when it rained and pulled out her own. Button tin. Larger. Heavier. With a hinge that had gone. Soft over time. She added the return buttons to the rest. Not to separate them. Not to keep them sacred. To fold them back into the hole. Like memory. Like family. Not clean. Not perfect. But still together. The envelope was set aside. Not thrown away. Placed in the drawer with the others. She'd look at it again later. Maybe or maybe not. What mattered had already happened. The button box was back. Not full, not empty, but returned. And that, for now, was enough to continue. She no longer kept yarn in sealed bins under the bed. The space was too dark, too far from where she worked. Instead, she moved the skeins to an open basket near her chair by the window. Not arranged by color or weight, just placed gently, as though each was waiting its turn. The red was there, though she hadn't touched it since. It sat near the bottom, half unwound, soft from handling. She never said she'd never use it again. But she hadn't reached for it either. There were projects she had started and left unfinished. A sleeve that didn't quite match the other. Its collar too tight? A scarf that had become too long to feel right. She kept them anyway, not for salvage. Not out of guilt, but because there was something honest about leaving them exactly as they were. Not everything needed to be corrected. Not everything needed to become something useful. One afternoon, while sorting through loose needles, she found a small note in her own handwriting, likely years old, folded into a scrap of patterned paper. Simply read, "Don't force the end. Let it stop when it does." She didn't remember writing it, but she knew exactly what it meant. Some stories don't need closure. Some rows don't need to be completed. They just need to be left open. Soft, unfinished, not as a failure, but as a truth. She spent that day winding yarn back into balls, undoing projects she no longer felt connected to. The sleeve, the too long scarf, not with sadness, with care. She pulled each stitch loose, gently, not hurried, letting the thread curl and rest. Letting the material return to its beginning. There was comfort in the return, in the undoing. Not to erase, but to remember that even things undone had been made once with thought, with time, with love. She kept the red yarn separate. Not hidden, but apart. In a smaller bowl lined with muslin. She didn't cover it. If someone visited, they might ask why it was there. But no one did. And she didn't explain. One night, as the rain tapped softly at the window, she reached over and ran her fingers across it, still soft, still warm, still waiting. She didn't pick it up. She just let it be some wool. She had learned isn't meant to become anything else. Some wool simply exists to remind you what it once tried to be. And, in its own quiet way, that was enough. It had been years since she visited that part of town. The street had changed. Some stores were new windows filled with things she didn't recognize. Others were gone entirely, replaced with blank facades or for rent signs. But the little shop with the yellow awning remained. The fabric store, it had never been large. Just 2 rooms, uneven floorboards, and a bell that rang too sharply when the door opened. The shelves were crowded, but not messy. It's the kind of place where you could find a forgotten bolt of linen tucked behind a row of velvet, or a discontinued skein of wool waiting quietly in a bin near the back. She hadn't meant to go in. She had only been passing through, headed toward the bus stop. But something in the light caught the edge of the awning. And before she could second-guess herself, she was already through the door. The bell chimed. The air smelled like dust and lavender. A woman at the counter looked up and smiled, then returned to her knitting without saying a word. She moved slowly through the aisles, touching, not taking, fingering the edges of things, letting the textures speak first. At the back wall, she found a shelf of yarn she didn't recognize. Newer labels, brighter colors. But in the corner, near the bottom, was a basket marked clearance. She knelt, and there it was. A skein of soft gray wool, nearly identical to the one she'd used for her own wrap. She picked it up without thinking, then hesitated, then held it to her chest for a moment, not tightly, just enough. There was no one she needed to make it for. There was no plan, but she bought it anyway at the counter. The woman glanced at the yarn, rang it up silently. The endang, just before handing it back, looked up and asked, "Do you want a bag?" She shook her head. No. She tucked it into her coat pocket as she left. It was warm there. Light, it didn't weigh her down. Outside, the sky was pale with winter sun. Not cold enough for gloves, but brisk enough to quicken the steps as she waited for the bus. She reached into her pocket again and felt the wool round, soft, patient. It wasn't a gift. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was something she had chosen for no one but herself. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like the beginning of something. The box still sat on the shelf above her desk. Not hidden, not displayed, just placed. It had been weeks since she'd looked inside. Months since she'd added anything. But it was there and changed in form, if not in meaning. She climbed the step stool carefully, as she always did now, and reached for it with both hands. The lid came off with a familiar soft pull of cardboard. Long used inside, the contents were just as she left them. The photograph, still tucked into the side. The twine, coiled neatly. The recipe card with faint flower smudges on one edge. She lifted each item gently, not as if they were fragile, but as if they were already known. And beneath them, the yarn, the red skein, still bright, still wound. She didn't move. It did. She just looked. The weight of what it once meant had shifted. It no longer pressed against her, no longer asked to be turned into something, simply sat, unchanged, waiting for nothing. She closed the lid, and this time, when she did, she didn't put the box back upon the shelf. She placed it in the drawer, not because it needed to be hidden, but because it had been witnessed, and now it could rest. That evening, she added a new slip of paper to her bedside notebook, smaller than the others. It's a single line. Some things don't need to be finished, only remembered. She didn't write anything else that night. She didn't pick up her needles. She didn't reach for the green shawl, or the gray yarn, or the old button tin. She sat in the quiet of the room, letting the stillness settle. The light from the window fading gently across the floorboards. What was kept had not been burned. What was given had not been returned. But something remained. Not closure. Not forgiveness. Something smaller. Something softer. Something like space. It wasn't planned. Not really. She had gone to the post office to return a catalog she didn't remember ordering. But the line was short, and the clerk behind the counter was kind, and she found herself asking for a small box. One of the padded ones. Not too thick. Not too wide. At home. She placed it on the table and stared at it for a long time. Then she stood, walked slowly to the cupboard near the hallway, and opened the drawer that hadn't been touched since late. Spring. Inside was a single skein of yarn. Gray. The one she had bought at the shop. With the yellow awning, she had never used it, hadn't even unwound it. It wasn't a gift. Not when she bought it. Not until now. She didn't include a note, didn't wrap it in tissue paper. She simply placed the skein inside the box, pressed the air out gently, sealed the top, and wrote the address in clear, steady script. Her nieces. Name. No return. Address. No message. Just the yarn. It arrived 3 days later. She would never know how it was received, whether it was opened gently or with confusion, whether it was kept or repurposed, or set aside like something misunderstood, but that didn't matter, because it wasn't about being understood anymore. It wasn't about apology, or restitution, or repairing the past. It was a quiet offering without shape, without pressure, not a cardigan, not a test, just the beginning of something that didn't need to be worn or finished to exist. After mailing it, she walked home slowly, her hands tucked deep into her coat pockets, her steps even and unhurried. Back at the house. She made tea. She sat by the window as the water boiled. She wrapped the green shawl around her shoulders and listened to the hum of the heater and the wind. Moving across the street, nothing had changed, not visibly, but something had been released, the last thread given away. Not cut. Just passed on.